Hi, and welcome to the Alcohol Free Life podcast. I'm Janey Lee Grace, and what a week it's been for me. And I figured today, I couldn't really, I just couldn't get my head around interviewing anybody for this podcast episode. It just felt as though, for me, this has been such a massive week, and I just figured I can't focus on anything really other than what's happened this week, which is, of course, the passing of my dear friend, Steve Wright, and my boss for 24 years. I'm sure lots of you have seen various, I've seen my social media posts, and some of you might have seen me pop up on TV. That was tough. Just a few hours after hearing about Steve's death, I was asked to do Sky News, and it's really difficult. It's like, what do you do? On the one hand, of course, you want to pay tribute to someone that you've known for so long, but on the other hand, it was just falling apart. But anyway, just in case there are listeners who are perhaps in the States or in other parts of the world, Steve Wright was literally a legend. I mean, that word gets massively overused, but he really was. He was really a legendary presenter in the UK. He actually has been doing radio for 40 years. I worked with him for the last 24 years on the BBC Radio 2 show. But he was the person who I think possibly really does get the title of being the most innovative broadcaster. He championed the zoo format. He's really funny. He's had so many interesting, popular segments on his radio shows over the years, pushed the boundaries of traditional radio formats. Everything he's done, he's always kept it really fresh, really engaging. Lots of you will remember Steve, from the Radio 1 days when he had all his guests and Mr. Angry and Gervais and all of his various, characters that he used to have on board. And he's always managed to just kind of refresh that and just come up with something new every time. So his radio stuff just never felt like it had gone stale, really. It really was always fresh, always engaging. And wow, I don't think I could have realized, I'm convinced that Steve would not have realized just how beloved he was. My goodness, the tributes that have come out this week, it's just been incredible. I've personally had so many messages. Thank you so much if you've sent me a message. It's really appreciated. But the social media, the media attention, he was on the front page news of every newspaper in the UK on Wednesday after his death was announced on Tuesday. It was very ironic, if that's the word. I was literally writing a post on social media about World Radio Day. It was World Radio Day on Tuesday. And I was literally writing this post and reposting something that I had written from when our show ended about my years on Steve's show and just how, incredibly important it was to me. And I was writing this piece on World Radio Day and talking about how much I missed being on the show, how much we all miss the fun and the banter and the laughter. And literally, as I was typing this post and uploading a photo of Steve and myself and Tim, the other co-host, a message pinged into my inbox, followed by several more. And I was just absolutely in shock. Obviously, my first thought was, that's just really cruel. What a cruel joke. It can't possibly be true. And of course, I pinged over to see a message from BBC Radio 2 to let me know that he died. So, yeah, absolutely heartbreaking. It really, really is. Such a absolutely devastating loss. And Steve was only 69. I immediately rang Tim Smith, who was my co-host, so it was good to be able to talk to him. And then, as you probably heard, I did Sky News at a few radio stations. I did Good Morning Britain with Tony Blackburn, and it was just amazing just to see the stuff that came out about Steve, people's memories, We were saying on that show actually that because on Good Morning Britain it was Ed Balls, the former politician, presenting, and one of the things I said on the show was that Steve was always really well prepped. I think everyone remembers him so much for his professionalism, and he was always really well prepped for his shows. But if a politician came in, he didn't necessarily give them an easy time. He wasn't scared to deliver the hard-hitting questions to some of the politicians, and we had some fantastic laughs over the years. I mean, I think that's the thing for me that I remember. If I had to sum up all of those years working with Steve, it was his professionalism, because he really was absolutely dedicated. He lived and breathed radio. Radio is addictive. I'm sure I've told you that before. That's why I miss it so much. And he lived and breathed radio. He really did. And I think that's why it hit him so hard when the show was axed. It really did hit him hard. I think we can't deny that. But I think he lived and breathed radio. He was so unbelievably professional. He was the hardest working guy in the industry. There's no doubt about that. But we had such a laugh the whole time we were there. I sometimes wish that the stuff that we said when the mic wasn't open, if that could have been broadcast, then I think you'd have really loved that. We should have definitely somebody should have definitely recorded that, and we should have done a series of outtakes, because he really was so hilarious. He really did have a lot of wit and a lot of humor. I think he probably could have been a comedian if he'd chosen to in a different life. You might be thinking, what has any of this got to do with your Alcohol Free Life podcast? Well, it has a lot to do with it, actually, because Steve literally changed my life in so many ways, being part of that program. I'm sure most of you know, I've shared many times that when I first started the show 24 years ago, when I first started, I had one son who was at that point a year old. I was very quickly pregnant with my second, and I was in the middle of a very steep learning curve, if you like, of holistic living. I was starting to do everything naturally. I was buying organic food. I was researching chemicals. I was making sure I didn't put anything on my skin that wasn't natural. I was really on a massive learning curve around holistic living. And obviously, as part of our conversations on the air, I would share some of that stuff, and I would kind of talk about natural deodorants and organic food and skincare without chemicals and cleaning your home with natural detergents. And of course, Steve used to take the mickey and kind of pull the mic down and go, "Oh, there she goes, cosmic bird, off again." And they used to kind of joke and jest. But actually, it was really, in truth, gave me a fantastic opportunity to share some of the stuff that was really going on in my life. And I used to get lots of emails and personal calls, and people would say, "Yeah, I know those guys are making fun of you, but actually I'm really interested. Is there a natural deodorant that works? So I'm really interested, tell me a bit more about the fact that you're homeschooling," or whatever it might be that I'd been talking about. And then it was during that period that a publisher came to me and said, "Oh, I've heard you, talk about a lot of the stuff you talk about on the radio, a lot of the stuff around natural living. Have you ever thought about writing a book?" And I just laughed and said, "No, I'm not a writer. No, I haven't thought about that." And she said, "Well, let me come and meet you. Let's have a conversation, because you're obviously passionate about the stuff you talk about. So, maybe we can talk about it." So I went out with this publisher, and she basically said, "If you've got a great idea to share, you don't have to be a good writer. It might turn out that you find you can write," which thankfully was the case. But if you can't, then there are people that can help you with that. It's all about your intention and your ideas. And I'm sure you've got some good stuff to share. So that was the beginning of my alternative, in inverted commas, career. Before then, I'd been a singer, as most of you know. I was on a backing singer with Wham, and I had my own hit, She Laughs, with Cola Boy, my 5 minutes of fame. But I hadn't done anything else really. I was a singer, and I was a radio presenter, and I did a bit of TV work. But this literally started a whole new career, because I wrote the book, Imperfectly Natural Woman. It did nothing at all at first, but then I was able to get an interview with Johnny Walker. The book went to #1 on Amazon overnight. And suddenly I had a whole new business, I suppose. I had to turn it into a business. I hadn't done any planning, of course. Absolutely not a businesswoman either. But somehow I suddenly had something new going on, and it was a whole new career, which was absolutely kickstarted by being on Steve's show. There's no way it would have happened if I'd not been on that show. So I'm really grateful, because it's given me another whole purpose, if you like, with the work that I do. And it is something I'm passionate about. I'm still passionate about it. Still have my Imperfectly Natural website, and I still do awards every year for natural products and services. And it's still an absolute passion of mine. And then fast forward to many years later, 2017. And again, most of you know the story, but I'll share it just in case you don't. It was just before Christmas. And of course, on the show, we used to interview the great and the good, the actors, the celebrities, the politicians, the authors. And just before Christmas 2017, I was given a book by a producer, and he handed over this book, and he said, usually we only get one night to look at a book before a guest comes in, if we're lucky. But he said, you've got a whole 2 weeks to have a look at this one. So read it over Christmas, and I'll see you in the new year. We're interviewing the author in the new year. And I looked at that book. Of course, it was The Sober Diaries by Claire Pooley. I looked at the title, and I swear to God, in that moment, I knew in that moment, right, okay, this is going to be it. This is going to change my life. And of course, I had been thinking about stopping drinking. I'd been thinking about stopping drinking for a full 10 years, actually. I'd had some periods of not drinking, and then I'd gone back to it. I'd had many occasions where I'd rocked up to a GP and said, oh God, I'm a bit worried. And as most of you know, because I've shared it many times, the answer was always, nah, you're fine. Just have an alcohol-free day. Yeah, if only I had a quid for every time. I'd been to therapists. I'd been to practitioners. I'd, just mentioned in passing, along with the other stuff, I'm a bit worried about my drinking. I'm drinking every night, a bit worried about it. The answer was always, nah, you're fine. And there really was this sense of, this is just normal. What I'm doing is completely normal. Everyone's doing it. I had no idea that there was anyone else like me who was functioning, who was holding down work, who had a family, who was doing okay, in inverted commas, but actually was waking up at 3 a.m. hating themselves. And when I just read the back of Claire's book, and I just thought, wow, hold on, this is the book that's going to change my life. I just knew it. So of course I didn't read it straight away. I needed to get Christmas over, didn't I? So I drank my way through Christmas, as always. And on Boxing Day, I started Claire's book. And the second I started reading Claire's book, it was as though a light bulb finally came on. Like, oh, wow. Hold on a minute. So there is someone else. There's someone else who knows how it feels to be drinking more than you want to have that awful feeling of regret. And yet somehow, when it gets to 6 o'clock, the wine which is in your ear, and you find yourself pouring a glass, even though you don't want one, it's as though there's a voice in your head saying, go on, you might as well finish off the bottle. Even though there's the other part of you saying, what are you doing? That voice that woke me at 3 a.m. used to say to me, this is not conducive with who you are. You're not being authentic. You're always talking about natural living, organic food, spirituality. You're a Hay House author, for God's sake. You're interviewing spiritual gurus. What are you doing? What are you doing? Pouring alcohol down your head every single day. What are you doing? And every single day I would make this commitment in the middle of the night, oh God, please let me not have a hangover. Please, I've got a really busy day. Please, God, please let me be okay. And then I promise I'll stop drinking. Oh God, I promise, I absolutely promise. And then by 6 o'clock, there's the wine witch, sun's over the yard arm. It would be rude not to have a large Sauvignon Blanc, right? That pattern, oh my God, that trap, that alcohol trap, it had me for years. years and years when I couldn't get off the roller coaster. And the reason I couldn't get off was because I didn't even know what it was. I didn't know that I was in a trap. I certainly didn't know that anyone else was in it too. I knew that I wasn't at rock bottom. I knew that, you know, rocking up to AA would not be the answer for me. I knew that I didn't need rehabilitation. I wasn't at that stage. Well, yet. I knew that. But I didn't know there was such a thing as a grey area drinker. I hadn't heard of Jolene Park's term. I didn't know that there were other people who were also drinking more than they want to. I didn't know that there was a way to get off the goddamn booze elevator before it hit the bottom. So Boxing Day, I start Claire's book, and I just knew straight away. It was so relatable. She was just like me. She was going through all the same things, and she managed to do it. She managed to do it. And reading that book opened my eyes to a world that I did not know existed, a world where there were alcohol-free drinks, where there were other people who felt the same way. There were meetups. There was mindset, you know, stuff you could think about. There were people on Instagram. There were podcasts. That's when I started listening to podcasts. And it was when I read Claire's book that I just thought, okay, I have to give this a go. I tell you what, I'll give it a go just till Claire comes into the studio. That was my decision to myself. So I stopped drinking on the 30th of December, 2017. I didn't wait for New Year's Eve. What would be the point? I just drove to a party. So no one asked any questions because I was just the driver. And I think I did manage to find an alcohol-free drink there, which was quite nice, which was good. And I made my commitment. Okay, Claire was going to be coming into our studio on something like the 4th or 5th of January. I could just do a few days till then. So I did. And it was relatively easy to start with because I'd made that little commitment that I would just not drink till the 4th or 5th of Jan, till I met Claire. Of course, Claire came into the studio. She was just lovely, so gorgeous, and just absolutely so supportive. And I afterwards kind of took her aside and said, listen, your book spoke directly to me, and I have done a few days of sobriety and I feel completely alone in all of this. And she just said, well, look, here's my email address. I'll support you. Of course, I didn't know then what I know now about the importance of connection. But then I thought, you know, I can do dry January. I mean, other people were doing dry January. It must be possible. So I did. And Claire was the only person that I told. I didn't know any of the things I know now. But back then, I didn't tell anyone. I literally, I just kind of got away with it. I just would pour a drink for my husband if he was drinking, although he never was a big drinker, but I would pour him a drink and I'd pour something alcohol-free for myself. And I got through those first few weeks. I now realize I could have made it so much easier for myself. But, you know, I had Claire as my little comfort blanket. I had someone to connect with. So that's a very long-winded way of saying I am hugely grateful to having that moment on Steve's show. I'm hugely grateful. I know Claire is as well, because I think lots and lots of people actually heard Claire on that show. You know, we had 9 million listeners, for God's sake. So lots of people heard Claire come on and talk about her book, which is just fantastic. And then later down the line, once I was obviously started my own podcast, and Claire was one of my first guests, of course, and I was rocking in my own sobriety, I would occasionally recommend guests to Steve. So later down the line, I got Catherine Gray on the show, which was fantastic. Catherine Gray came on to talk about the unexpected joy of being single, and then the unexpected joy of the ordinary. She came in a couple of times. It was just fantastic to be able to have Catherine on the show. And you know, Steve was always very welcoming of these guests. He was always very open to hearing what was going on, even though he took the mickey out of my holistic living, if you like. He was always very open if I suggested guests, you know, that I really wanted to bring on the show. Janet Thompson, another fabulous woman who has done some stuff for our Sober Club member portal. Janet does fantastic stuff around NLP and EFT, and Janet came in on the show talking about her book. And so, you know, there's been lots of opportunities over the years where we've managed to bring together the two worlds, if you like, my kind of holistic world and the very mainstream radio show. So there's no doubt about it. His impact on my life has been absolutely huge, absolutely huge. Being part of that show for 24 years was really, really incredible. And I do feel incredibly blessed to have been able to do that incredible work. Well, it wasn't really like work anyway, but to have met Steve and to have been able to spend time with him and to be able to laugh and joke as much as we did, I do feel really blessed. And the other thing I wanted to share is this thing about grief, because there's been such an outpouring of grief for Steve, even from people who didn't know him well. You know, he really was so beloved. And I do think grief's an interesting one. It's really interesting that so often, and I see this with members of the Sober Club, grief, you know, comes upon you, and it can hit you. It hits people in different ways, of course, but so often it triggers all kinds of other stuff that you just simply weren't expecting. So often it's a shock, and the very first thought that your mind goes to is, oh, how do I cope? How do I deal with extreme shock? And the very first thought is, I'll reach for a drink. It's so common. I remember years ago, a friend of mine used to say her elderly mother would always keep champagne in the fridge in case someone died. she had a lot of elderly friends, and she used to say, well, you know, I have to keep the champagne on ice because we're going to need it, you know, if someone dies. Like, wow, the literally that association. Alcohol is so linked to the celebrations and the commiserations, and it's like you can't grieve without alcohol. How unbelievably ridiculous is that? We have to shake off these associations. We have to realize what's really going on, this sort of trigger reaction cycle. We get this trigger, we reach for something, but we have to remember to put the pause in, you know, and recognize that pouring poison in is not going to solve anything, whatever is going on, whether, you know, someone has died or whether you're celebrating. That's why I always say to people, by the way, if you're choosing to moderate, which I don't believe you can do, if you're someone who doesn't have an off switch, then, you know, the answer's right there. It's there on the tin. But if you are trying moderation, I always say, set yourself some parameters. Obviously, you're going to have to choose which days or how much you're drinking. So you set yourself those boundaries. And then after you've set those boundaries, add on another boundary. And that is that you will never drink, even if it's a dedicated day, if you are feeling really upset or angry or grieving. Never drink, even on a designated day. And that's an interesting one, because that actually wipes out quite a lot of the times when you would be drinking, because of course your unconscious mind knows that you're using alcohol as a way to get past whatever is going on. And we know, don't we, that the early weeks of stopping drinking can be really tough, because we have to feel all the feels. And, you know, with grief, when people have died, the awful thing is having to face it, you know, having to face the grief. It's just awful. It really is awful. But there's nothing that's going to bring the person back. So actually numbing yourself is absolutely not going to help. I remember I did a podcast. One of my podcasts is with Yakov Darling Khan. Go back and have a listen to it if you haven't heard it before. Yakov Darling Khan is an amazing shaman who also did a great piece, an exclusive piece for us, for Sober Club members, of movement medicine. And he was talking about the fact that one of his dearest friends died at the beginning of the COVID, at the beginning of the lockdown, and he couldn't fly to the States to be with his very dear friend before he died. And he was absolutely heartbroken, literally heartbroken, and just couldn't fathom how to process the grief. And so what he did was he literally just dropped into his body. Sometimes you just have to let the body take it. You can't sit in meditation. It's too much for the mind to process. So you literally drop into the body. So what he did was he has drums, and he just drummed and did some movement. And for our Sober Club members, he does this fantastic session where he's just drumming, and for about 15 minutes. But if you can't listen to that, then just put a track on and shake it out. Literally shake it out. Sometimes that's the best thing we can do, is to let the body take it rather than trying to consistently, think everything through. And then the final piece that I wanted to share with you on this podcast is, when someone dies and it's a real shock, it makes you think, wow, none of us know how long we've got, do we? We really don't. And it always brings into question that thing of, am I living my life to the full? Am I doing what I've said, what I had, what I say I want to do? Am I living to my values? When I do my sober coach training, one of the exercises that I do with all the coaches is I get them to look, because obviously in order to be a good coach, you need to point the finger back at yourself first, right? And we look at our values, what's important to us in our lives. I don't mean values like, integrity and honesty, and we know about those, but I mean the aspects of our life that we really, really value. And sometimes what we find is that people will put something on their values wheel, if you like, that they say is really important to them, of utmost important for them to feel okay in their life. And yet they're not actually putting any time into it at all. It's that rainy day thing. Oh yeah, I'll get to that, when the kids leave home, I'll do that. I hear it so often about sobriety. People will say, I know I need to stop drinking, and I've got it. I really do understand. I've listened to loads of podcasts. I've thought about joining the Sober Club, but it's not the right time now, because I've got my daughter's wedding coming up, or I've got a holiday coming up, or I've got Christmas to get through, or whatever it is. But I'll definitely do it at some point in the future, in about 6 months' time when I'm ready. And so often we say these things, we put off what it is we want to do with our lives until allegedly a better time. And one of the little recordings I made a while ago, I can't remember what I even called it, but the essence of it is that if you think of life as, well, they used to call it 70 years and 10. Now, Wrighty didn't even quite make that, did he? 69, for God's sake. Whenever I share this, this kind of, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, thought process, I always say, of course, most of us are hoping we'll have a lot longer than that. We're hoping there'll be at least another 20 or 30 years on top of the 70 and 10. But let's just imagine, for the sake of argument and in honor of Wrighty, if it is 70 years and 10, if it is 70 years that you're on this earth, then let's split it into decades. And then let's imagine that each decade aligns to a day of the week, right? So imagine we start on Monday. So Monday, that's 0 to 10. Tuesday, that's 10 to 20, and so on. So I'm guessing most of you listening to this podcast are on, I don't know, Thursday or Friday, right? Some of you might be on Wednesday. Most of you listening to this podcast are on Thursday, Friday, or Saturday, right, of your life. And when you see it like that, wow, it's really shocking. Oh my God, I might be on Friday or Saturday of my life. And I remember sharing this, I remember talking about this with my husband years ago, a few years ago, and he's a composer, and he's a bit of a procrastinator. Sometimes he procrastinates. And I remember having this conversation with him and saying, so given that, you are where you are, is there stuff that you've always said you want to do? And if so, why aren't you doing it? And I remember it hit him profoundly, and he kind of went, oh my God, I'm on Friday night. So if I've only got the weekend left, I'm absolutely going to get started on what it is I want to do. And he's written the most amazing musical. If anyone's got any contacts, that would be very nice. But the point is, sometimes when you do this little exercise, when you think this through in your mind, it can jolt you into realizing none of us know how long we've got. And why don't we just live every day the best we can? And why don't we do the things we say we want to do? It's kind of that simple, really. I think Wright, he did. Certainly, for the majority of his life, he literally lived and breathed radio. It was all he wanted to do. And I think, that's the legacy he's left behind, isn't it? That's absolutely the legacy. So thank you again to all those of you who left messages for me, and to all of you who have commented on social media and shared your tributes to Steve. I hope you don't mind me turning this podcast this week over to this kind of tribute to Steve. It just felt like I couldn't really talk about anything much else. And just a reminder that, if you are back where I was in 2017 and for many years before that, ditching the booze is the best thing you will ever do, because ultimately what we all want in our lives, is to feel balanced, to feel okay. Happy is an odd word, but you know what I mean. We want to like ourselves enough to be comfortable in our own skin, to be able to be authentic. That's ultimately the bottom line, isn't it, really? We can talk about self-love. It's been obviously Valentine's this week as well. We've been doing a self-love challenge in the Sober Club. But it doesn't matter whether you call it self-love or self-acceptance or self-esteem or authenticity. You can call it whatever you like. It's about being okay with who you are. And I personally think that's not possible while you're still drinking, if you're drinking too much. I really think that, because, alcohol, when you're drinking alcohol, it's self-harming. It is. I know that sounds ridiculous and really hard-hitting. Like, don't be stupid, I'm not self-harming. Well, you kind of are. You are, if you put in, one of the world's most harmful drugs into your system on a regular basis, and you're doing that. If you have a glass of sherry once every Christmas and you never think about alcohol, well, you probably won't be listening to this podcast. But I'm guessing you're good to go. But if you're drinking every day, or you're drinking more than you want to, or you're binge drinking, if the answer to the question, could my life be better physically or emotionally without the booze, if the answer to that question is yes, then by continuing to drink, you are self-harming. But you know what? You can stop. You really can stop. And life is so much better without alcohol. So if you're at that point, let me encourage you, let me inspire you that this is the best thing you will ever do for you. The best thing you'll ever do. There are other fabulous health things you can do. And of course you can, do a boot camp and go on a different diet and etc. But nothing is as important as quitting the booze if you're someone who is over drinking. Nothing is more important. And it will change everything. It will absolutely change what's going on physically. Everything will improve. It will absolutely change what's going on emotionally. And over time, you get to like yourself. And my God, that is a gift. That is a gift that, there's that expression, isn't it? Sobriety is the gift that keeps on giving. I hate that expression. I really wish I could think of another one, but I can't. But the essence of it is true. It is the gift that keeps on giving. Every year of sobriety gets better. I'm 6 and a bit years now. Every year is better. That's why you see all these amazing celebs. Marion Keyes has been talking about it again recently. Just how important it still feels after many, many years to be sober. So don't put it off a moment longer. Whether you're on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, even the Sunday of your life, don't put it off. You might have another 30 years. I hope so. So why not make them the best years you can possibly have? Liking yourself, right? You cannot underestimate the power of that. You cannot underestimate it. So thank you so much for listening to my little tribute, my little rant. Don't forget that if you would like support, you can join us in the Sober Club. It really is a fantastic resource there. There is so much amazing stuff. I'm very lucky to have some great guests. It's thesoberclub.com. It's very low cost. Come and join us as a member. If you're interested in training to be a sober coach, I've got a free webinar next Wednesday night, Wednesday the 21st, on what does it mean to be a sober coach if you've ditched the booze and you're now thinking of inspiring others in some capacity, doesn't have to be coaching. And if you want to dig deep into the whole how do I like myself thing, how do I make peace with myself, how do I heal the past so that I can heal the present, then check out our Family Constellations Day, which is in York on Sunday, the 25th of February. There's still a few tickets left. Be amazing to see you there. And just a heads up that we've got another Alcohol Free Life podcast meetup at the beginning of April. That's going to be in London. So you know where to find me. Please follow me on social media at Janey Lee Grace. Please feel free to drop me a message. If you're doing this, then tell someone. You can absolutely tell me and I'll hold the vision for you, but don't keep it completely to yourself, because then it'll just be you and the wine witch popping in. So share it with someone. And if you're doing it, give yourself a huge hug, and RIP Righty.